The jail guard and the inmate, a forbidden romance that shook the system, the escape nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this story, make sure you hit subscribe, because once you hear how a trusted officer fell in love with a murderer and brought down an entire system, you'll realize that sometimes, the most dangerous prison break starts with the heart. It began on an ordinary Friday morning, April 29, 2022. The Lauderdale County Jail in Florence, Alabama, was running like clockwork, or so everyone thought. Guards made their rounds. The sun burned through the fog that clung to the parking lot. Inmates lined up for breakfast, their orange uniforms glowing under the fluorescent lights. At precisely 9:41 a.m., Assistant Director of Corrections Vicky White walked through the corridor, clipboard in hand, her silver hair tucked neatly under her standard-issue uniform cap. She was known as one of the most trusted employees in the facility, firm, respected, and meticulous. But that morning, she wasn't following protocol. She was executing a plan. Her destination, the secure housing unit, where 38-year-old inmate Casey White, no relation, was being held. He wasn't just any inmate. Casey was a towering man, 6 feet 9 inches, with cold eyes and a past that terrified even the hardened criminals around him. He was awaiting trial for a brutal murder and already serving a 75-year sentence for attempted murder and robbery. But when Vicky arrived at his cell, the interaction was calm, almost gentle. She told the officers on duty that Casey needed to be escorted to the county courthouse for a mental health evaluation, an appointment that, on paper, didn't exist. Casey was shackled, hands and feet bound, and guided into the backseat of a sheriff's department cruiser. Vicky drove. No other officer accompanied them, an unusual break in procedure, but nobody questioned her. She had 25 years of spotless service. She was the last person anyone would suspect. As the gate lifted and the patrol car rolled out, a camera caught a brief image, Vicky White, eyes straight ahead, jaw tight. Casey White sat silently in the back, staring out the window. Neither of them would return to the jail that day. By noon, when officers realized they hadn't arrived at the courthouse, the alarm went up. Radio calls went unanswered. Dispatch logs were blank. Vicky's phone went straight to voicemail. Within hours, every law enforcement agency in Alabama was on alert. Inside the jail, disbelief spread like wildfire. "It can't be," one officer muttered. "Vicky wouldn't do that." But as detectives began piecing together her movements over the last few months, a disturbing picture started to form. Security footage showed her visiting Casey's cell more often than protocol allowed. Commissary records revealed she'd been buying extra snacks and clothing. She'd recently sold her house, at a suspiciously low price, and withdrawn tens of thousands of dollars in cash. And then came the kicker: she had filed retirement papers, set to take effect the very day of the escape. The sheriff, visibly shaken, addressed reporters that evening. "We believe this was not a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was well planned and executed." But no one yet understood just how deep the manipulation ran, or who was truly manipulating whom. As night fell over Alabama, a manhunt began. Helicopters circled highways. Patrol cars fanned across state lines. Every motel and rest stop from Mississippi to Tennessee was checked. Yet, the pair had vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in a small roadside motel outside of Evansville, Indiana, a woman matching Vicky's description checked in under a fake name. She paid in cash. Cameras caught a glimpse of her, dressed differently, her hair dyed dark. No one noticed the tall man waiting in the car outside, his frame barely contained by the driver's seat. Back in Florence, investigators found more clues, including something that chilled them. When they searched Vicky's desk, they discovered a set of blueprints for the jail, with Casey White's cell block circled in red ink. The sheriff looked at the evidence and whispered, "She planned this for months." To her co-workers, Vicky White had been the image of professionalism, strict, dependable, and married to her job. But now it seemed her loyalty had shifted. Some called it obsession. Others called it love. And somewhere on the open road, two fugitives, one a killer, one a corrections officer, were living a dangerous dream. But there was one thing neither of them knew: their every move was being tracked, their faces plastered across every news screen in America. The net was closing in. And soon, investigators would uncover a secret that would turn this twisted romance into a national scandal, the manhunt and the secret they tried to bury. The sun was setting over Alabama when the first FBI agents arrived. What had begun as a missing persons report was now a full-scale manhunt spreading across state lines. The escape of Casey White and corrections officer Vicky White wasn't just another breakout, it was a national scandal. The media called it the forbidden escape. Posters flooded highways. News anchors replayed security footage of Vicky leading Casey out of the jail over and over, two figures walking calmly toward a patrol car, unaware they were walking straight into infamy. Every station in America carried their faces. The nation watched, transfixed, as the story unfolded, the killer and the guard who risked everything to free him. But while the world speculated, law enforcement worked relentlessly behind the scenes. The U.S. Marshals Service took the lead, analyzing ATM withdrawals, tracking phone pings, scanning highways for the missing Ford Edge Vicky had purchased just days before the escape. What they found shocked everyone. Vicky had used an alias to buy the getaway car, paying cash. She'd also ditched her department-issued phone hours before they fled. Every step had been planned. Every trail, deliberately obscured. Still, they weren't ghosts. 2 days later, a car matching the description was found abandoned in a Tennessee backroad. It had been spray-painted orange to disguise it, a sloppy move, considering Vicky's usual precision. Inside, investigators found prison uniforms, handcuffs, and a loaded rifle. But no sign of them. Detectives realized something important: they were running out of resources. The cash she'd withdrawn was finite. They'd need food, gas, and somewhere to hide. So the search widened: truck stops, abandoned buildings, motels. The fugitives could be anywhere. Meanwhile, in Florence, interviews with Vicky's colleagues revealed a heartbreaking side of her story. She was nearing retirement. Her husband had died years earlier. She had no children, no family left nearby. Alone, vulnerable, and perhaps craving purpose, she'd found it in Casey White. He had charmed her. Letters, conversations, small compliments. Over months, he'd planted seeds of fantasy, that once he was free, they'd start a new life together. He painted himself as misunderstood, a victim of circumstance. And Vicky, once the most by-the-book officer in the department, believed him. But this was no fairy tale. Casey wasn't in love, he was in control. Some investigators theorized he manipulated her completely, using affection as a weapon. Others believed she orchestrated the entire escape, seducing him to help fulfill her fantasy of freedom. Whatever the truth, their connection was undeniable and deadly. By day 6, the manhunt had stretched across the Midwest. Tips poured in from every corner of the country. A farmer in Kentucky claimed he saw them at a gas station. A waitress in Arkansas swore she served them breakfast. But each lead collapsed into nothing. Then came the break. A man in Evansville, Indiana, called 911 to report a suspicious vehicle parked at a car wash, a Ford F-150 pickup with tinted windows and out-of-state plates. Surveillance footage showed a large man, unmistakably Casey, stepping out, his frame dwarfing the truck. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, but his face gave him away. Within hours, the FBI and U.S. Marshals descended on Evansville. They discovered that Vicky had rented a motel room under a fake name, paying in cash. For 11 days, they'd been hiding in plain sight, living quietly, watching the news, and waiting for their next move. Inside that small room, the walls were closing in. Vicky spent hours watching the coverage of their story, realizing the entire nation now saw her not as a loyal officer, but as an accomplice. Casey grew restless. He wanted to move again, to reach the Canadian border. But Vicky hesitated, the plan was falling apart. On May 9, 2022, their time ran out. At 3 p.m., marshals spotted their Cadillac near the motel and began pursuit. Sirens echoed across the streets as police cars closed in. The chase was short but violent, the fugitives crashed into a ditch. Smoke poured from the wreckage. Officers rushed forward, weapons drawn. Inside the car, Casey was yelling, "Help her! She shot herself." Moments earlier, Vicky White had turned her gun on herself. The scene fell silent except for the wail of sirens. A life that began in uniform ended in tragedy. Casey was pulled from the wreckage alive, his face streaked with blood and disbelief. As the ambulance carried Vicky away, officers stood motionless. One veteran deputy whispered, "She was one of us, how did it come to this?" But investigators weren't done. The crash revealed evidence: fake IDs, $29,000 in cash, for loaded handguns, and several wigs. The truth was undeniable: this was not a spur-of-the-moment escape. It was a carefully built plan, and a love story that had curdled into obsession. Yet, the biggest question remained unanswered. Did she do it for love, or was she manipulated by a man who saw her loneliness as his weapon? As reporters swarmed the crash site, Casey White was taken into custody, his escape finally over. But in the morgue that night, investigators found something that froze their blood: a note in Vicky's pocket. It read simply, "I wanted to start a new life, but I ended it instead." The chase was over. But the truth, the real, unfiltered story of what happened between Casey and Vicky White, was only beginning to emerge: love, lies, and the last goodbye. The crash site in Evansville faded into a ghost of torn metal and police lights, but the shock of Vicky White's death rippled far beyond Indiana. In Alabama, at the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office, there was no celebration, only disbelief, grief, and quiet shame. Officers stared at photos of the woman they once trusted, unsure how to reconcile the hero she had been with the fugitive she became. Casey White sat handcuffed in a small interview room hours later, his wrists bruised, his clothes stained from the crash. He was tall even seated, his shoulders broad, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, they flickered with something cold, something hollow. A detective spoke first. "Vicky's gone." Casey stared at the table. He didn't blink. "We need to know the truth," the detective continued. "About you. About her. About everything." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Casey exhaled, a quiet, exhausted breath. "She wasn't supposed to die." His voice wasn't grief, it was confusion. Like he couldn't understand how the fantasy had shattered so violently. "She loved you," the detective said. Casey looked up, his jaw tight. "She thought she did." For the next 3 hours, the story spilled out, pieces of truth tangled with manipulation and denial. He spoke about how it started over a year earlier, during his first stay in Lauderdale County. Friendly conversations turned into hushed exchanges. Vicky brought him extra food, slipped him phone numbers, smiled at him like he mattered. "She was lonely," he said. "I filled the void." Detectives exchanged glances. It wasn't tender. It wasn't affectionate. It was calculated. Casey continued, "She helped me because she wanted something new. A fresh start. Like she'd been sleepwalking her whole life." "But did you love her?" a detective asked. Casey paused, and for the first time, there was a flicker of humanity. "I cared about her, in my way. It wasn't enough. It was never enough." Detectives pressed on. "Did she help you escape willingly, or did you manipulate her?" Casey leaned back slowly, metal cuffs clicking. His lips twitched into a half-smile, not of joy, but of a man who knew the world would never hear the full truth. "You can write it however you want," he muttered. "But she chose to be there." Later, officers escorted him back to the Alabama prison system, but this time, there were more bars, more locks, more guards. His escape attempt had earned him a lifetime in solitary confinement. A cell within a cell. Back in Indiana, Vicky White's final hours were replayed over and over across the nation. The quiet woman who once enforced law and order was now the face of forbidden love gone wrong. Her funeral was small, attended by colleagues torn between loyalty and betrayal. Some cried. Others simply stared at the ground, unsure what to feel. "There's no manual for grieving a traitor," one deputy whispered. Yet, amidst the tragedy, investigators uncovered one final revelation. At a rented storage unit tied to Vicky, officers found packed bags, clothing, a disguises kit, and a small notebook. Inside were days of planning, sketches of routes, notes about moving money, even lists of towns far from Alabama where no one would know them. But on the last page, scribbled in shaky ink, were words that stopped everyone. "I don't regret helping him escape. I only regret believing he loved me." There it was, the truth she lived and died in. A woman who traded her life for a man who only saw her as an exit door. The case closed officially weeks later. Vicky White remained behind bars, more alone than ever, his story a cautionary tale whispered by corrections officers across the country. Not every enemy is outside the fence. Sometimes, they earn a badge first. In Florence, Alabama, the jail replaced Vicky's name on the staff wall. Her picture was taken down quietly, the space left empty. Some thought it cruel. Others thought it necessary. But late at night, when all is quiet and the echoes of keys and steel fade, her story lingers like a cold breeze through the corridors, a reminder that loyalty can crumble, and hearts can betray more violently than bullets ever could. They called it a romance. They called it a scandal. But in the end, it was a tragedy of choice. And if you think this story was intense, just wait for the next one, where love, lies, and loyalty collide again in ways no one saw coming.